So, welcome everyone to this Fireside chat, part of a series done by myself, Kamran Naim, and John Chudaki as part of the Open Publishing Fest, where we're looking to get an understanding of how people have come to where they are at the moment, the kind of work they're doing, and what they feel is important about that work. My guest today is Kamran Naim, who's head of open science at CERN, the International Particle Physics Facility. So welcome. And can you tell us a bit about what does the head of open science at a place like CERN do on a day-to-day basis, and what does that look like?
Cool. Well, thank you for having me. So I think, for starters, I should say that the role head of open science sounds pretty grandiose, and actually, in some ways, it doesn't necessarily represent. My work in this role doesn't necessarily represent what the whole organization does, because CERN's really big, and so there's a lot of people, a lot of individual initiatives. So initiatives at IT that are very much open science initiatives, initiatives that the CERN experiments take around making their data available, that also kind of fall into the realm of open science. What I manage within the Scientific Information Service is specifically a couple of things. So one is managing the operations for Scope 3, which is the sponsoring consortium for open access publishing and particle physics. It's a global consortium of around 3,000 libraries representing 43 countries, all of whom kind of contribute to a central fund, which we've used to underwrite the publishing costs for 11 of the top journals in high energy physics, and to make them effectively immediately open access and in perpetuity. So that's the task that really takes up most of my time. We also are developing a technology, an in-house technology called CERN analysis preservation, which is a tool that kind of really fits into the ecosystem of CERN open science, where obviously, as you can appreciate, the amount of data that the CERN experiments generate is huge, and it's probably the largest research data set in the world, and is extremely complex. At CERN, in each of the experiments, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of researchers working at any given time, and there's a lot of mobility between the experiments. So what CERN analysis preservation does, it's supposed to essentially complement some of the initiatives around making data open, where we're providing a tool to build into the workflow of researchers at CERN to help them kind of preserve all of the elements of an analysis that help you kind of understand and derive meaning for the data. So whether it's computational environments, software, workflows, notebooks, all of the different elements that can help really explain what is being done at a specific experiment, so that when we do make data open through the CERN Open Data Portal, that researchers from the outside world will be able to make sense of that data by kind of having all of these analysis assets released at the same time. So CERN analysis preservation is a tool that we're managing and developing in-house. And then we also work on kind of broader initiatives. One specifically is the European Project Freya, which is looking to develop this kind of Europe-wide infrastructure using PIDs. And so we have a kind of a component of that where we're developing some pilot initiatives, like a PID services registry. But open science at CERN, as you know, probably goes much wider than just my section and its activities. So in CERN IT, there's obviously Zenodo, which is probably the world's largest open science platform. Tools like Rihanna, which is our reproducible analysis framework that have been developed by CERN IT, and the CERN Open Data Portal. So we're kind of, there's a lot that we do at CERN around open science. another one of my main tasks is really to try and establish a CERN-wide open data policy that can kind of bring some coherence to all of these various activities that are happening at the organization, and really get the buy-in of all of the experiments to kind of have one unified strategy for open science moving forward.
Which sounds like, yeah, there's a lot of variety and a lot of different communities involved. But you didn't start off in open science.
No, I didn't. Well, I mean, it depends on how far back you want to go, but I actually started my career, after graduating in the UK from university in corporate finance. And it took me a few years of doing that to understand, why my mother was so disappointed in me for taking that career track. She'd always kind of encouraged us to do something useful for the world. And so, it took me getting disillusioned with the corporate world to decide that I wanted to do something that, was kind of benefited people, particularly in the developing world. And so I, kind of left that kind of path in my career, and I moved back to Pakistan, which is where my family is originally from. And within a few months of going back, I started getting involved in the it's kind of new wave of higher education reforms that were taking place in the early 2000s. And so this huge new investment in education that took place in Pakistan at that time. And the Minister for Science and Technology, my first day at work, dropped a note on my desk saying that we need to establish a digital library for all of the universities in Pakistan. So what ended up happening as a culmination of that was we kind of developed this like centrally managed consortium where we negotiated with publishers and some that provided free or discounted access, and kind of ended up building this like nationwide centrally supported model, which ended up getting the attention of the World Bank and some other agencies, and then had me kind of move to other parts of the world trying to do similar work. So once we established a program in Pakistan, I worked on a project that was called the Iraq Virtual Science Library, which was designed to help Iraqi scientists who have been cut off from access to, from attending conferences or from being able to read journals because of the sanctions imposed after the first Gulf War. Iraqi scientists were effectively cut off from the international science community. So this was kind of a way to re-engage Iraqi academics and make research journals available to them. That work then ended up evolving to working in Northern Africa, and then ultimately to doing similar work in Sub-Saharan Africa as well.
And so you spent quite some time working on issues of access and working out ways to give researchers in different places access to subscription content. Was there a particular experience that led you then to look particularly at open access that led you through to the work on Scope 3 that you're doing now?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the really kind of important moment for me was in 2012. I presented at a conference in Oxford. It was a symposium of the International Network for the Availability of Scientific Publications, so INASP. It's a great organization in the UK. And I gave a presentation about my work in Sub-Saharan Africa, where we had been working with Research for Life to kind of help improve the usability and accessibility of the content that was available through Research for Life, which is primarily a lot of the STM publishers that make their content available through those programs. And what I had realized from my work was that awareness of those systems were low in institutions in the developing world, and there are quite a few usage barriers. So we developed some solutions, and I presented on it at this conference. And right after I spoke, this guy called John Walensky, who I'd only ever like heard of and like, read a few of his pieces, came down and, in 15 minutes completely made me rethink the way that I was approaching this problem. So it wasn't, I realized that the problem really wasn't about making, research information that is, only available via subscriptions and affordable to, well, in some cases unaffordable to institutions in wealthier countries, and providing it either free or at a discount as some form of charity in a sense. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about trying to secure charitable status, because ultimately that's not sustainable. What we really need to do is think about restructuring the system so that research is available for free to everyone. And so, he convinced me in that session that there was, enough money in the system to make it happen, and that, the universal open access was really the way of solving this problem for the global South, but then also for the rest of the world too. So I cornered him after that after his presentation and said, can we go grab some dinner? That led to him asking me to apply to a PhD position at Stanford, where he teaches. And a year later, I was driving across country to Northern California to start my PhD, and ended up spending 6 years working on cooperative open access models with John.
And where did that lead you to? What does that tell you about systems we have at the moment and how they do or don't work? Now you've done that deep dive into the various models.
Yeah, so my specific interest, and again, this kind of comes from my my primary concern about making systems that are equitable, particularly for researchers in disadvantaged communities, was that the embrace of APC-based open access, as as it should be kind of congratulated for really taking hold and helping to advance the main push that we've seen and the progress that we've seen in open access in the past few years, that having author-facing charges in some ways can actually develop a more pernicious barrier. So for researchers in countries where they weren't initially able to afford to read journals, they were still able to publish without a fee. But now if we were asking people to pay a fee to publish, what you're essentially doing is preventing them from participating in the scientific conversation. So I think we would have to be really mindful whenever we develop any kind of a model to understand whether or not there are any kind of unintended consequences. We may be interested in taking care of our own community and the people that we serve and advancing their interests, but I think we have to be really mindful that we're not creating other barriers, for other people in the system. So I became really interested in this idea of cooperative open access models, and I was lucky enough while I was at Stanford to actually work a full-time job while I was there. So I worked with Annual Reviews, which is a nonprofit publisher of review journals. And I joined Annual Reviews at a time when Richard Gallagher was taking up the helm as the new editor-in-chief and president. And he was very interested in exploring open access. And for review journals that are only published once a year, a journal that has about 20 articles, they're invited publications. The APC model doesn't work for them. So really what they had to do was to see, okay, well, can we develop a collaborative open access model? So I had the luxury of being able to kind of pursue things theoretically at Stanford, and then having the opportunity to try and, implement something on the practical level at Annual Reviews. And we were lucky enough to get a grant at that time from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and I was able to get Raim Crow involved. And so together we kind of developed and piloted the subscribe to open model, in which effectively the publisher uses the existing subscriber base and redirects the subscription spend to make content open. And so that content, once it becomes open, it's OACC BY, it's used through a redirection of subscription money. So there's no author-facing charges in any way. It's just kind of strategically redirecting existing subscription money to make content open, which are the kinds of models that I think we need to advance and explore if we're going to really kind of make further progress in OA. And I think particularly now that I think I'm hoping that we have this somewhat historic opportunity with COVID-19 where publishers all kind of to their credit all kind of got together and made COVID-19 research open access and kind of mobilized thanks to efforts by folks at the Wellcome Trust. But in a sense, what it was is this kind of tacit admission that the subscription system is not the way to solve the world's problems and to do it in the most effective way. And so I don't know why it took COVID-19 knocking on people's doors for them to take action when the world has been suffering from major public health crises and environmental crises for years. But hey, maybe this is the moment where we can advocate for universal open access and do it with a diversity of models. Certainly,
it's a moment where people have started to pay attention to some of those issues at any rate that maybe haven't before. So in 2019, so you'd moved from doing a PhD at Stanford, working with annual reviews, and in 2019 you moved to your current role at CERN. What's it like walking in the door on the first day at a place like CERN? What's that experience?
I'll say that it is. It's pretty intimidating. I consistently feel like I'm the dumbest person in the room when I'm at meetings at CERN, but I kind of like that. I feel like I have something to learn from everybody, and as impressive as physicists are, and as little as I understand about what they do at CERN, I'll say that the community has been super warm and welcoming, and I think the physics community, particularly particle physicists, openness is kind of built into the DNA of the discipline, and so being able to advocate strongly for open science and open science practices within this community is a real privilege and a pleasure, because they understand its importance, and they understand what they need to do to make it happen. So I'll say that there's still a number of challenges that we're seeking to address, but it's exciting. I love going to work every day.
And so, so what do you think is the most important thing then that you're wanting to get onto and get done?
So, I don't think there's any one thing in particular. We have a couple of opportunities now. There's a few different consultations that are going on. Like one that's particularly interesting, which is UNESCO's consultation on open science, where they hope to kind of get organizations and governments around the world to kind of buy into open science principles. And they've reached out to CERN to help kind of inform their consultation. And I really see that as being a really important role. Now, CERN has taken all of these initiatives in open science. Like I mentioned earlier, they have been done, largely through individual effort. I mean, obviously we have an open access policy, but our efforts in open data and tools like the reproducible analysis framework and our analysis preservation efforts, they are all part of this infrastructure, but have lacked really this kind of organizational level mandate. And so what we're hoping is that through the open data policy, we kind of get to that point. Once that's established, I think we can firmly say that CERN is able to demonstrate leadership in open science, and that we have a ton of expertise to share with the world. So, obviously, all of our softwares we make open source. We've got some open hardware initiatives as well, but there's all this expertise and knowledge that has been derived through the development of our programs. So in the knowledge that it takes to build the infrastructure of Scope 3, the knowledge that it takes to run and manage a global open science platform, or these big kind of open data portals. And we'd like to be able to share that experience with other disciplines and kind of really help push the envelope on open science. So that's really what I'm looking forward to, is having the opportunity to expand beyond just the kind of the boundaries of CERN, and to help have an impact in the broader adoption of open science around the world.
And that after all, is what's at the center of being open, is being able to share that expertise,
absolutely,
and experience, and learn from others. So thank you very much for that. Thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Kamran is on Twitter, and he's tagged in some of the tweets. So if you want to ask any further questions, you can probably get in there.
Feel free.
Please join us, myself and John Chudaki, for the rest of the series, the Fireside Chats. I've got another one coming up in just over an hour and a half with Caitlin Thaney from Invest in Open. And you can find the rest of the schedule at the Open Publishing Fest website, which, if my computer will catch up with me, I'll be able to share with you shortly. But thank you for joining us, and hope to be able to speak to more of you in the future. Thanks, Kamran, and
thank you.
Cheers.
Yes.